You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
Sleigh bells ring, are you listening? The Jeep won't start, and I've been cussing. It's in the driveway, I should have bought a sleigh. Walking around with Jeeps not starting. That was right off the cuff.
Down to the last wire.
Exactly.
Oh, my, oh, my, oh, my.
And that,
oh,
kids, is
my.
why I don't have friends. Maybe
Hey,
I do.
Jeeples. Well, if you haven't figured it out, this is the Christmas edition of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott.
Show 131.
Show 131. I'm Kevin, the engineer, general Jeep tech guy, the one who reads instructions, uses the right tools, and follows those instructions 90% of the time.
And I'm Scott. I'm the slapstick parts guy with a stick of sleigh bells in my hand over here trying to think about a clever way to put Jeeps and Christmas together, but unfortunately that hopefully just means Jeep parts for you. So again, while we will share what worked for us and what didn't, it's really up to you to do what you do with your Jeep. So do your research, read the instructions, and just
please,
like Rudolph.
Please follow those instructions.
Exactly.
So, well, everybody, as you're counting down, this will be the
15th?
15th show, so the last show before the great, the celebration of the birth of the Christian Jesus Christ. That's why it's Christmas, but, it's in Christ's Mass. But regardless, I won't get into that because I know that we have listeners of every other religion and every other choice, and may you have a happy holiday in your form and format as well.
Absolutely.
So we're still working on our new house and new digs for the, my group. And so we actually don't have a tree up this year. So we've just been baking Christmas cookies. I introduced Scott to Pizzelles, which is an Italian cookie.
They're actually really good. It's funny because, I know people when they hear the licorice, they're like, "Ooh, I kind of." What was it? The seasoning?
Anise.
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 Actually had a really cool. I like licorice. I'm the kind of person that the strange odd duck eating the good and plenties out of the box because I love the taste of licorice. But it's actually pretty good. Then he did a vanilla one that was actually nice and crisp. I don't have a tree up this year. For different reasons. Yeah, but the idea is I still have holiday cheer in my heart. So that's the important part. And also
Bad jokes on your lips.
Yeah, that too. And by the time this comes out, I'll hopefully have a running LJ.
Oh,
yeah. We got something to report soon on that. Shane over at Gulf Coast Drive Shaft, known
also is specially drive shaft here locally.
Working on a top secret Skunk Works project. So that'll be coming out soon. And also, right after this show gets released, we'll be finally installing the lift on the LJ.
It's been in your storage unit for how long?
Over almost a year, and and I hopefully have a hardtop too.
Yeah.
So
yep. So Will and Mattson over there at Metal Cloak, we're finally put. Yeah. Well after the warranty expires, we'll be putting it installed.
Yeah.
But, at least it's been stored inside, so it's still nice and gold. So it fits with the Christmas
nice
theme.
and shiny. Hope we didn't lose anything to the box. Oh, no. Why did I put that in my head now?
No, the boxes weren't even broke open when we moved them from one storage unit to the other, and I swept the old unit, so if there was parts there, I'd have seen them.
Exactly. Oh, man, what's even sacrilegious is all my medical lift is actually in a Jeep box.
It is.
The lift box. So.
Yeah, it is.
It's on wheels, so I can wheel it right out when I'm ready.
Right.
But other than that, nothing really more to report for me. Just kind of getting through the day, kind of working hard and hardly working at the same time. But
well, and then a little bit of an update from the last show where we talked about Shane's TJ acquisition, and you can hear the security crews here on the floors, doing their sweeps.
Exactly. Marco.
But he has started with some of the rust repair. Put in a driver's side half floor pan the other day, and he's doing that with some guys that are helping him at the shop. I just kind of go out there and see what they're up to. And found a few more little rust holes, but nothing really that serious. So they're going to get that all fixed up and properly seam seal it so that it doesn't let water in. And then he got the sound deadening mat to put down for heat control, and they're going to go with the bed rug as well.
Sweet.
And they ran without the carpet one day, and they're like, "Oh, this is a wee bit warm."
My feet are melting. It's really hot. Sorry.
And but they've got their plans going, and so there's going to be yet another TJ build here in the near future. He says he's been out. They've driven it all the way over to St. Pete, and we're probably 30 miles away from St. Pete.
Yeah,
they run around with it, and they says it rides great, it drives great. It's for a 97 that was pretty much stone stock, it's a great little toy. So
Every now and then it's nice to have one stock like that, though.
it is. It gets a lot of attention when people have to look down on a Jeep.
Check out the lowrider.
Yeah, exactly. Excuse me.
Nah, no worries.
So, anywho, I hope everybody is finishing up their shopping and wrapping their last presents. And I know how hard it is to wrap, Fox Shocks and 37 Mudders and.
Thank you, Amazon. All my shopping is done.
Yes.
I even shipped it right to the people's houses.
Yeah. Well, Sue and I had the easiest one, and that is we're not buying gifts for each other this year because we've got that house.
You got a big gift.
So we can just hope that the power company gets through their paperwork and we actually get power to the house so that we can finish it.
That poor sleigh as it's just dragging its belly carrying a house.
Yeah, well.
Gonna need some extra elf magic for this one.
Yeah, well, I could use the elf magic right now, but
Keebler or never mind.
no, I've had enough Keebler. I'm starting to, fill out the pants again. I need to keep losing weight, not gaining. It's hard to do at Christmas, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That it is. All the yummy treats, and again, I still have my Reese cup addiction. Besides that point,
Yeah. So, folks, I guess I want to give a shout out to, and I'll just use his first name, and that is Jamie. Jamie reached out to me. Let's see, when the show comes out, that'll be probably a week and a half ago.
Yeah, week and a half ago.
Actually,
That's
he
good, man.
reached out to the interwebs generally, and he has a 07 JK or JKU. I didn't actually get a clearance on that. So, but that first year of the JK series, and he had replaced the alternator because I guess it had failed, and then they had replaced the ECM because with the new alternator, it still wasn't charging.
Right.
And he was at wit's end. And from what I can tell, Jamie is pretty savvy guy. Showed me some pictures and showed me particularly some of the tools he was using, and he knows his way around a wire.
He's no slouch.
He's no slouch. But he reached out in general, and then Scott and Mark from
the Jeep Lab.
The Jeep Lab had kind of referred him over to me, and I kind of read through his stuff, and we chatted back and forth. And the problem is the 07 through the 12 or 13 when the JL came
11.
out. 11.
Oh, yeah. Well, the JL came out in 2018. It was a split year. 18 had the JK and the JL, I think.
Okay, yeah. But so through 18, you just can't get factory service manuals very easily on that. Primarily, I'm looking for, it's all online. And what's that system you talked about?
Identifix.
Identifix. So it's like a CD you throw in the computer and
Well, it's kind of online, like login kind of thing.
Right. And so I'm really trying to find some wiring diagrams because when you're chasing electrical, it's really nice to know. And there's this big blank, and it seems like they went back to manuals for the JL because I found a few manuals online for the JLs. So we got down to basics, and I've checked this and I've checked that, and all of these other little bits and pieces, and the more he explained it, the more we talked a little bit about what he could do, and I left him just 4 comments to check 4 different things, and he did dig into it, and lo and behold, very next day, I got this, oh my God, it's fixed.
Nice.
And I'm not saying it was me, it was him. He did all the digging, but he discovered that the connector for the field controls to the generator, and we'll talk about this because this is going to lead us into a garage segment a little bit, had corroded or overheated. I can't tell by the picture, but it's very discolored and had lost connection on the ground side. And therefore, if it was no ground, the computer, which on everything since about the 03 and later, the alternator is controlled by the PCM.
Right.
And if you lose that ground connection, everything else can be hunky-dory, brand new, spit polished, and the computer doesn't know the alternator's there.
Yeah.
And therefore doesn't bother sending a charge signal. And what that boils down to, and I'll get a slight bit techie on you here, is that originally an alternator, particularly the GM style and the ones in the Chrysler styles, had 2 wires on that field plug. The big stud where the big red wire comes off, the big red wire that melts YJs and sets them on fire because it goes to the fuse box, and then the rest of them it goes to the positive battery terminal. And then there's a plug on the side, and it usually has two wires, and one is called Sense, S-E-N-S-E, and the other is usually, it's marked I, and it's usually for initiate. People say, oh, it's ignition. Well, it goes to the ignition switch, but it's really the initiate. All modern alternators don't have any magnets in them per se. They're just field windings and then armature windings. Armature being the part in the middle that the belt spins, and the field windings being the stuff on the case that you see when you look through the cooling slots and you see all those copper wires.
Right.
Well, electromagnets work just as good as solid magnets and probably better in some cases. The downside is you can spin that armature all you want until something initiates the field coil. It's not going to generate power. Now, as soon as it starts, gets a kick in the tail, it will generate its own power, and it can power itself as well as have enough power to run anything else you want on the Jeep. So the initiate wire was hooked up to your ignition. In the old days, we talked about this before on several shows ago when we were working on an older Willys Jeep, that it went through the light on the dash that would be illuminated when power was flowing to the alternator. But once the alternator initiated charging, then it would balance that power with 12 volts of its own, and you'd have no current flow, which light would go out. So you wouldn't have and if the alternator died, anyone you were driving, power would begin flowing through the ignition switch back to the alternator through that line. The light would glow, and you know, oh, my alternator's failed. Sense was just what it says. It's sensing the voltage somewhere in the system.
Right.
And that wire typically ran to the point of highest power consumption in a vehicle. In most Jeeps, that'd be the fuse box or the underhood power distribution unit. Mm-hmm. And if the voltage dropped below the set point voltage that the alternator was set for in its little solid state controller, usually about 13.8, it would ramp up the voltage at the stud until it saw 13.8 at that sense location.
Right.
So that's why sometimes you got 14.2, because down the wire at the circuit box, you were drawing so much power, the voltage was dropping. Well, somewhere along the line, like I said, 03-ish time in the Jeep world, somebody said, well, you know, that's great, but now the alternator's always trying to charge. Mm-hmm. And it's not a smart device. It doesn't anticipate. It doesn't necessarily have the surge and all that kind of stuff. We need to make the alternator smart.
Right.
Well, we got smart stuff in the computer. You can do it as simple as it is. They took the control circuitry, the sense circuit for lack of a better term. In some models, it's on the power side. Some models, it's on the ground side. But they hooked it up to a pulse width modulation circuit in the PCM. And the PCM goes, more power. It basically turns this alternator full bore on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. And the faster you turn it on, and the wider you make the pulses, the more voltage you see out. And then, you know, yes, it's got capacitors that smooth it out so you get a good clean output voltage, but the computer now is in control of that alternator. So if computer can't talk to the alternator, you got no nothing. Even though everything works fine. Mm-hmm. And folks, when they test them, this is the punchline. Very few shops have a smart tester. So they all put them all on, they plug into the plug, and they turn the switch on, and the switch just goes 100% on, 100% ground.
Right.
And then, yes, it will show that, okay, the alternator can produce power. And if you have that situation and you're not getting it out when you put it in the Jeep, it's pretty well pointing the finger rock solid at either the control circuitry wire or the ground. There are different versions. There's a 3-wire plug as well as a 2-wire plug. And it can bite you in the butt because on the 2-wire plug, it's controlling the circuit on both sides of the control circuit, the power to the control circuit saying turn on as well as the ground coming back out. And that's how some of the models are going, is the alternator working or not? Okay.
Yeah.
Other ones, it's just the power out and then the ground, you know, and the ground goes to a chassis ground. And it goes to the infamous G103 ground. And I'm sure most of you have never heard of that number before, but G103 in the electrical world is one of those that you kind of go, there's the equivalent of a G103 in the Chevy world, you know, in all of the world. It's that ground stud on the engine block, typically on the passenger's or driver's side, at the back of the engine, right down behind the exhaust headers, up against the firewall.
Exactly,
That you can't get to.
Yeah.
And it turns green with corrosion snot regularly, breaks off and kills off your injectors, loses your charge control to your alternator.
Everything.
It's just, come on, guys, can we find a better place to put that?
Yeah. The Achilles heel.
The Achilles heel. So anyway, but I wanted to give a shout out and kudos to Jamie for putting up with it and not giving up. Mm-hmm. He had gone through it himself. He thought it all worked, but he discovered the connector problem, and we'll get into the how and whys in the garage segment. So there's a teaser for you.
Mm-hmm. That's also known as, what is it, foreshadowing maybe?
Yeah, foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing, yeah.
So,
well, that's kind of interesting because a lot of times we try and break down the mysticism of electrical gremlins because, again, just like typically in the auto parts world, try to replace the alternator because it's got to be the alternator, because maybe we got a defective one.
Got to be, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe it's got to be the battery cables. And he tried jumping it right from the alternator right to the battery and nothing.
Nothing.
It was like dead as a doornail. And that's one of the frustrating things about being a parts guy is when you hand a part over, and a lot of these techs, when you talked about like the last show, where unfortunately they rely too much on scanners, and if there's no check engine light, they don't know what to do. So it's just got to be a part. So they're going to throw a bunch of parts at it.
Yeah.
And of course, you're the parts guy. You're handing parts over to them and still not fixing their problem. Whether it's over the counter to the retail person or to the technician, it gets extremely frustrating because it's the classic, well, tell me what's wrong with my car. It won't charge. Well, there are some steps you have to do. Unfortunately, the culpability, the responsibility is on you, the owner,
to diagnose.
To diagnose properly. And it takes steps. It takes know-how. It takes the ability to think logically and break down the information in small little bits. Because if you don't do that and you try and tackle it all at one time, it will become overwhelming. And most people give up.
They do.
That's why the one Jeep, again, Shane's Jeep went to 3 different shops.
Yep.
Because I'm sorry, there's nothing to do. Sorry, there's unfortunately, that's where a lot of the industry is heading towards.
It is parts changing, and as we said then, that unfortunately computers only report what they're told.
Yeah,
we said that in the last show. And if the failure is not in a monitored circuit, not a system, a circuit, the computer doesn't know about it. And there is no P code because, well, it can't monitor. It's just like the fact that before we had tire pressure monitors, they couldn't see a tire. Okay. Yeah. But now they can see the monitor in the tire, and you just hope that the monitor's correct.
Yeah.
And these are just some of the things that when you become
self-aware.
Yeah, I was going to say service aware on maintenance and service. You have to think through, okay, how do I get the effect? And then what's all of the steps in the effect? And only part of those steps are the electrical. And even some of the electrical isn't monitored by the computer. So,
well, you can't touch on our little conversation. Like 90% of the problem is
powers or ground,
and the other one was an actual broken wire or the failure of the electrical device.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you, these are round numbers. No, they're hearsay. I don't have a solid,
Yeah.
Nobody's gone out and done a total.
We don't have an Excel spreadsheet.
No, but generally speaking, I would put the percentages at 90%. Yes, our security officers wandering around doing
their checks.
Doing their checks, telling us that we're recording at a weird time for them. No, that is not Zaya. That is Zoe. My daughter had a thing for Z's. And Zoe is about 20 years old and pretty much blind and going deaf. And she kind of maneuvers like a Roomba, bumps into things and turns and bumps and turns. And
still has an appetite.
But still has an appetite, still a happy cat. Just, she's bumping around going, okay, I hear voices, but
kind of like an echolocation with the volume turned really down.
Yeah. So anyhow,
and welcome to Cat Talk with your hosts, Scott and Kevin.
You do have to think through the fact, like we did the other day on the idle air control. Okay, I've got a vacuum source that it's idle air is a deliberate leak in the intake system that lets fresh air in.
Yeah.
That takes a mechanical. Well, the mechanical's driven by an electric motor. The electric motor is hooked to the computer. Okay, the computer's happy. It's going, yep, I see that my motor's turning. I'm getting feedback from the motor.
Problem somewhere else.
And the vacuum, though, the leak's not getting bigger, stopping the engine from, letting air in, so it ran. And so somewhere between there, and of course, anytime it's explained like that, everybody goes, well, that's obvious. Yeah, it is, unless you're staring at an engine that's kind of going,
That's wheezing its last breaths practically.
and you have to kind of know what's going on. So, anywho,
Yeah.
otherwise,
You want to go ahead and take a quick commercial break, then tippy tire into the garage segment?
yeah, let's do that. I think that's going to follow in with a nice segue to this whole kind of wandering dissertation on fixing stuff.
We'll be right back. Hey, Jeeples and Jeepettes. Just wanted to make sure everyone knows that congratulations to Mark Cantrell, the owner of Wrangler Fix. He got himself number 101 of 1,000, a Rubihara LJ with a hardtop. I'm a little bit jealous, Mark. But congratulations on your purchase. Went all the way to Phoenix to get it.
Yeah, he did. And because it came from Phoenix, which not only has no salt water, no snow, well, I shouldn't say that, the high altitudes do, but in general, it's immaculate. It's beautiful. It's silver, complete with its hard top, that rare color hard top. It's
Congratulations, man.
Congrats, yeah. Congrats, and you deserve all the jealousy.
Yeah, pretty much. So if you do want to check out his page, just go ahead. It's just in the name Wrangler Fix. And if you also want to check out our Patreon page, please do. We also have a YouTube page, and of course, as always, the 4x4 Radio Network. Lots of really cool content on there. But for right now, though, we are going to tippy tire on into the garage and see what Kevin talks about. Some really cool stuff that can make you educated and smarter.
Hey, folks. Kevin here, and picking up where we left off. One of the things this whole thing with Jamie's Jeep kind of slapped me upside the head, and I've got to apologize to all the listeners and everybody else out there, is that, Scott and I were having this discussion that you realize you're trapped in your own head, and you tend to think everybody knows what you know.
Kind of like the conversations I have in my head that I forgot to have with you, and when I say something, you're like, Scott, we never had that conversation.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And so we're going to start covering that in various episodes over time, trying to get it down to basic concepts that you should be able to figure out, even if you haven't been through this whole rigmarole of Jeep ownership and repairs. Mm-hmm. And right now, since we started off with a story about electrical, we're going to pick up with one of the concepts that I realize that I've never heard anybody talk about. And it's one of those little things that you learn the hard way in most cases. And we talk about it in this case, which is checking continuity, grounds, and powers. Mm-hmm. And what does that actually mean physically?
Right.
Okay. Now, I spit it out like anybody else. Well, you need to check the ground. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What am I checking?
I wiggled it. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And what I want to zoom in on right now is that when you're talking about checking grounds and powers, you need to make sure that your test light or your multimeter, the negative lead is hooked to the negative terminal of the battery.
Right.
You don't just go stick it anywhere.
Yeah.
Because if you're not fixing it, to the battery, you could have a break somewhere, anywhere in that circuit. Mm-hmm. Grounds go back to the negative battery terminal.
Right.
So that's what I do, is I'll put a clamp right on that negative terminal. I've even gone so far and have found that the battery clamp itself is dirty and gets that black buildup between the terminal and the clamp. And so I tend to stick my probe right on top of the lead terminal or the screw bolt if it's a side load,
right,
and start checking from there. And what you do is you put your negative probe, you have leads, either a little clamp on the light, and then the light has like a screwdriver handle with a needle point on it, and the handle glows when you stick it into power. Mm-hmm. First thing I always do is stick the negative lead on the battery and the positive lead on the battery positive terminal and see what the battery reads.
Right.
Okay. And that's on the voltage setting. And then you'll change the setting to ohms. You can leave the power hooked up. And then you take that negative lead back, still on that negative terminal, either with a clamp or somebody holding it or wedged in there.
Right.
And then you go to the location where you're supposed to have a ground. In the case of the alternator, the black lead to the alternator. And you put it on ohms and you read that. And if it's 5 ohms or less, it's probably a good ground. It really should be around 1 ohm or less, but they make allowances for up to 5. And that's what you're doing. You're actually having the meter in a parallel wire from the battery to whatever device is supposed to be grounded to that battery. And it may go through 3 wires, 2 bolt heads, and a bulkhead fitting before it gets there.
Right.
And if you're not getting it, you can start jumping back each one of those screws and just testing and reading. And somewhere along that line, you're going to go from 30 ohms, 4 ohms.
Right.
Well, between the 4 ohm one and the next 30 one that you did previous, that's where your problem is. Either the connection's there, okay? So that's what we mean by checking the resistance in a circuit. This is where the wiring diagram comes in handy because it tells you where you have connectors, where you have splices, where you have ground points. And there's even little pictures that show you where they are on the body of the engine or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to get down a little deeper. And this is the one that I had the epiphany that never thought to check with. And it's a term I've used, and you'll find in every book out there it's called back probing. All right. And no, it's not something that Martian invaders do.
Easy. Family show.
I know. I'm just saying.
I was trying not to make that a whole joke the whole time.
Now, yeah. Back probing is simply a term for taking a probe, a metal probe, and you don't do this on dangerous voltages, but 12 volts is usually okay to work with. And you slide a narrow, thin, needle-like probe from the backside of a connector where the wire comes in to where you touch on the metal contact inside it.
Right.
All right. And then you can actually use a multimeter on that needle and see what the ground or power is present. Now, one of the dangers in that is you can back probe. You don't know, though, am I touching the wire or am I touching the actual crimp connector? Because if the wire is good, but your crimp connector is broken away from it, it'll test okay.
Yeah.
But it's not. So then you have to look at it and you have to realize in any connector assembly, what side is the power coming from and going to?
Right.
So if you're checking, for example, on an alternator, just using the same example that we were before, it's very tempting to say, well, power's coming out of the alternator. Well, no, it's not. On the field winding side, power is coming in to the field windings. The power that goes out, that's generated, goes out on that big stud.
Right.
So in this case, if you're testing it thinking I'm checking for power out, you're not going to see any.
Right.
Okay. You're only going to see power coming in if it's actually getting there from whatever the source is. In that case, that's the ECU sending the pulse width signal, which might not show up as anything other than 1 or 2 volts or maybe 5 volts or whatever, because it's, again, some little angry pixie at the power switch going on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off.
With their can of Red Bull.
Or yes. So many times it's prudent to disconnect that connector, okay, if it checks good, if you check that you have power on that side, and then turn it around and front probe it. Front probing is a term of taking that pin and testing the actual metal connector.
Right.
Do I have power through there? So what you've just done there is you've checked the actual crimp, okay, between the wire and the metal pin in the connector. Caution here, big red flashing letters, caution. Do not push the needles into the connector. Just touch the metal.
Right.
If the pin of the needle is bigger than the connector, you'll distort the connector and you'll never make good contact again. The idea here is just to touch the metal with a point. Now, this is why I have a set of test probes. They're about $15, $18. In addition to the regular ones that come on a multi-tester, these have needle probes built in, so that I'm not trying to hold a T-pin and the and everything together, And I've seen many people ruin connectors pushing pins and things like in particularly if you're working on the ECM ones. Those connectors are so fine and small, you can booger them up in a heartbeat. The idea there is just to make contact with the metal, which you can see it.
Right.
And the test probes, you can hold it in one hand and have the pen and the lead. So you front probed. Then you can go around, if you can get to it, if it's an inline connector, you can back probe, you can plug it back together and go to the outbound wire and test back probe that one.
Right.
And then you get the picture there. You've checked the wire, you've checked the connection between the wire and the pen to the pen, and then the pen to the wire going out. And that is exactly where Jamie found his problem. His connector on the field coil side of his alternator had disconnected and overheated up in that connector.
Yeah.
And so he had lost the connection that was energizing or grounding, I didn't check to see which one, the control coil, which turned the alternator on and off. And so if it's disconnected, it doesn't come on no matter what you do.
Yeah, it doesn't. The computer can't tell it what to do.
Yeah, and it doesn't even know it's there, quite frankly.
File 404 not found.
So back probing is an art unto itself, and it's something. Yet it's not a bad thing if you're going to get into this to practice a little bit on some old pieces. If you can find somebody that's got a junk harness or some,
Go to the junkyard.
Go to the junkyard and grab some pieces, and start looking at connectors. You'll find out that there's open connectors that you can see the backside of the connector from the outside. It's usually filthy dirty, but it's open.
Yeah.
There's some that have little sleeves or rubber boots. There's other ones that have, weather packs have little grommets that go in there, but they're soft enough rubber that you can work a pen down in beside them and back probe. Back probing is very good for checking things while they're running because you can tap into, as long as the connector's together, you can tap into it and go, okay, is this wiper motor working? Is this light bulb getting power?
Right.
And it lets you see things that you might not see, which is voltage under draw. Because sometimes when the plug is disconnected and you front probe the plug, which is to check it with the plug in your hand,
Right.
It'll read 12 volts or 13. But under load, the circuit has too much resistance, and so as soon as the load goes on it, it drops to 6 or 7. And
When operating,
it can't produce
15.
the voltage. That tells you something there. So the idea here is that there's probing is it's a very gentle, delicate task, but it will tell you about the health of the electrical system, and things like ground connections. You can get into those and touch the screw, but also not just touch the bolt or screw that is the ground. Touch the connector.
Right.
I have had connectors that you're looking at it. It's under a bolt. The bolt is tight, okay? Yet if you touch that little metal ring and tab that goes out on the wire, it's not grounded. But you touch the bolt,
It's grounded.
it's grounded. And that simply means that corrosions and oxides have built up over time in between those metals.
Right.
And the major fix on that is you disconnect the battery, undo that bolt, take a piece of Scotch-Brite, clean every one of those little ring terminals.
Yep.
And you screw it back in, and lordy, everything works.
Well, that's a quick little byline to that. When you talk about how the corrosion creeps up, it might just be within that tiny bit of threshold. One more night out with a dew point higher.
Yep.
It takes that last little bit. So everyone goes, well, it can't be the ground of this because it ran fine yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, again, sometimes it takes that just a little bit more corrosion.
Well, that's the whole 5 ohm rule.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll get in there and you'll do continuity and it'll pass continuity. And folks, continuity is done by a meter that you put between 2 points, and it says, is there wiring continuity? And the answer is yes, because it only puts a trickle voltage down that wire to see if it shows up at the other end.
Right.
There's no load to it. There's no draw. So you can have high resistance and still have continuity. And in the automotive world, there aren't too many things. Resistance is reserved for devices. The computer looks for resistance in a fuel injector. Mm-hmm. It looks for resistance in a coil pack. And that's how it monitors its health. That's when it says the coil pack's breaking down, is all of a sudden, instead of it having let's say a 50 ohm resistance, it's got a 5,000 ohm resistance.
Right.
There's still continuity, but it's restricted. The idea is it's a garden hose with the nozzle wide open,
we're just gonna talk
or
about the
choked
garden hose.
way down.
Yeah, when we're doing AC training,
Yep.
they talked about how some guys, as he put, some good old boys just get a test light out, and light come on. See, it's got 12 volts. No, that could only be 6 volts. You don't really know.
Yeah.
Learn to use your electronic diagnostic equipment so that way you'll know, because the threshold of it working may be that 11 volts.
Yeah. And there are many things that are actually 11 volts as the threshold for operation. So the idea is learning how to probe a joint or a connector. Well, everything in a Jeep is put together with electrical connectors. Everything, There's nothing really in there that's what I would call true hardwired.
Yeah, bow to stern.
So you need to be able to check the health of a connector, because that is often the source of those mystery failures that, well, this tested good, that tested good, this tested good. I checked continuity and I've got continuity. Why is it not working? Oh, it must be the computer. That's a pretty expensive guess.
Yeah.
But you can do a very gentle. Now, I have even gone to the point of doing continuity and resistance checking on actual ECU PCM pins.
Right.
But that is done with a very fine probe, very carefully.
Yeah.
And, more, like I said, it's not inserting the pins into, but it's doing a touch. Now, what I will say is I talked about a T-pin. Folks, T-pin is actually in the sewing world. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on, you can go down to your local Wally World and probably go into sewing sections, and you look where all the needles and pins are, and you'll see a box of these heavier gauge pins that they're steel and the top is folded
Into a T
shape. And they were used for draperies and other sewing things with heavier materials. And they're really good when you're doing a lot of testing. And they also can give you a point where you can put an alligator clip on and test stuff. And so that's really cool. And I grew up using them a whole lot in my younger years. But as cars have gotten smarter, Jeeps included, I know they're not cars, but
I know.
But as they have gotten smarter, the wires have gotten lighter. We talked about that a show before, where we're now using control circuitry to run relays and power distribution units as opposed to switch directly.
What was 14 to 16 gauge is now
24.
Yeah.
2024. And a T-pin is a big pin, and it can distort a lot of connectors beyond their useful range. So be very careful with T-pin connectors nowadays. I wish they'd make some really fine ones, but I'll be honest with you. I saw that one box of T-pins for $4. They're still useful. But I'm really leaning towards just going ahead and ordering yourself a lead kit that goes on a multi-tester. And you can get a back probe pin set for those that go down to those very fine wire pins. One warning, though. If you slip with them, they're going to go in your finger deep. Yeah. I speak to that from personal experience. It's like, oh boy, that was like a blood sugar test, about 14 times deeper than needed to be.
Why is this always in a Band-Aid moment?
Well, my granddaddy used to say that to me. Job ain't done till you bled on it.
Yeah. Or in my case, job ain't done till you had a head injury. Bong.
Yeah, you just need to get the lift a little higher.
No, I need to wear a bicycle helmet when I work on Jeeps,
But hopefully, if you guys have more questions about those kind of details, wiring and that kind of stuff, it's really a little bit of process. It's hard to describe in speech, but I'll do my best. There's a little finesse to it. That's why I tell you the best thing to do is go, get an abandoned connector. If you have the old radio adapter kit, you can kind of see what it looks like. And the idea is to learn how to sneak past the water seals.
Yeah, without
damaging them. And the last one I'll tell you about, and this only comes in certain kits. I don't even have this in my kit because it's so dangerous if you don't follow up afterwards, and that is the wire probes. And they are little screw fittings that have a little J hook and a V and almost looks like a needle out of hypodermic.
Yeah.
And you slip it over the wire, so the wire sits in that little V, and you spin a little wheel, and it drives a little metal hypodermic needle through the insulation into the wire itself. Mm-hmm. And then you can hook on a regular probe lead, little push-on probe lead, into it and read what's going on. and it's fantastic way to tap into signal wires and things if you have a scanner or an oscilloscope or a picoscope to read that information.
Right.
The downside, you have now voided the insulation.
Mm-hmm.
You must seal that.
Yeah.
You either, if you can, the best way is to seal it with a piece of heat shrink. But of course, you didn't take the connector off, so you probably can't.
You can't.
So liquid electrical tape is the most common use. Regular electrical tape usually is not sufficient. It'll last for a couple of weeks.
And then melt off.
Then it melts off. So you end up making sure you get yourself some liquid electrical tape and don't slather it everywhere so everything is this puddled black goo.
You just, less is more.
Yeah, so again, there's a process to everything to do it successfully and correctly and not create more problems.
And when in doubt, read the instructions.
Yep. So, excuse me. But so that's kind of the thing with the electrical testing is understanding that all you're trying to do is make sure those little angry pixies can run down that wire from one end to the other with little or no roadblocks.
Yeah.
And usually the failures is somewhere along the line, the road's broken, closed for repairs, hopefully. And they don't jump very big gaps unless they're in the coil. You know, those are big angry pixies.
Yeah, those are.
And they usually jump and you kind of know they're there. Oh, by the way, don't back probe the ignition lines.
Really?
The low voltage is fine, but the high voltage hurts.
Yeah. Hey there, second nerves. How's the Kadzit business?
Exactly. Usually you don't need to back probe those.
Hey, Timmy, hold this.
We used to do the old style, which we had the little lead with alligator clips on both ends, and you'd put it onto your best, cleanest screwdriver shaft, and then put on a glove and hold the handle of the screwdriver, put the other lead onto the ground, and slide it up and down the spark plug wires, and you crack, and you'd always
there you go.
But oh yeah, there's your. Yeah, and then if you didn't hurt, you'd show off with holding the screwdriver out and seeing how far you could make the spark jump.
Good old Sparky.
Yep. But no. Any questions or comments on Scott on that?
Not really.
Probing?
We pretty much covered everything. Again, just like anything else, it's breaking down the mysticism, understanding the process, understanding the failure tree, sometimes, as you call it. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be a quick thing. It sometimes might be arduous. You might have to do it 2 or 3 more times just to make sure, but be patient with it. Just with anything electrical, just be patient. Take your time. Walk away and take a break if you need to.
Yep.
You can do this. The tools are relatively inexpensive.
They are.
And again, 3 different shops. Can you imagine the bill? If we're talking some shops pay between $80 to $190 diagnostic labor time.
Right.
Sometimes it's worth a little bit of sweat equity. Take that chance because again, it will only benefit your skill knowledge and allow you to tackle these problems. You might be able to help somebody else out, but also too, you'll know roadside repair, trail repair. You'll understand the process to do this yourself and not be stranded.
Right. First couple times you do your electrical searching. Yeah, it's nice if you got someone who you go, do you know how to back probe something? And they kind of look at you and go, no, I'm talking about electrical. Oh, okay, yeah. And show me, because once they show you and you get a visual on it, it's actually really, really straightforward. You go, oh, yeah. Okay. And then you start doing the smart thing. You realize that every connection is a potential failure point. Mm-hmm. Wires can break. That's what happened on the TJ, but it's little more, that's typically more the exception than the rule. It's usually the connections that fail because connections have to be unprotected copper or steel or tinned copper at best for them to be able to make electrical connections when they're pushed together.
Right.
So inherently they are subject to corrosion. And this is my pet peeve with the ground connections that every automotive and truck and marine manufacturer do is they all use unprotected ring terminals for their grounds. Well, that's the same exact electrical circuit as the power side that's got the insulations and the weather-packed push-on seals and all that kind of stuff. And though you leave it out on the side of the engine block where it goes through hot and cold cycles, gets splashed with, cruddy water from, everything from mud. And then you wonder why they fail. A couple of the folks that I follow on YouTube that do work up in the north, And we'll comment on, there's some classic GM spots that are it's almost not even worth testing. They're like, let me lift this one box up. Yeah, there it is. Look at that. Green pus is what one guy calls it,
Well, that's like the premium Japanese manufacturer I deal with every day. They actually, where it bolts to the frame, they are now encased in epoxy.
And that's a good idea as long as it's the problem I have with epoxies though, and this is just Kevin.
It's pliable, whatever.
Well, okay, if it's pliable, that's fine. Most epoxies are hard set, which crack and then allow capillary action. But yeah, grounds for you, I'll throw a curveball out there for you guys that are doing fabrication. Okay. If you're doing fabrication and you're putting your ground studs on, the best thing in the world you can do is on sheet metal, drill the hole through the sheet metal, weld a T-nut or a small carriage bolt to the sheet metal on one side, run a nut up tight on the other side, weld that, okay? Then put your ring terminals on. So it stands a little bit off of the panel.
Okay.
You'll be able to clean it. It'll drain and it won't corrode as quickly. And because you welded the bolt and the nut, okay, which are both the conductor paths back to the sheet metal, which is a conductor. Right. That's the thing you got to get used to, folks, is thinking of your body sheet metal is actually a wire. And the weld gives you that solid, almost 0 ohm connection. Mm-hmm. That is, if your weld's any good. And it just has to be one spot weld on each side, but you have hit both the stud and the nut, which is now the surface. Mm-hmm. And then my favorite is, Scott's heard me say this a few thousand times, if you take a tab on a ground wire, one of the little eyelets, get a handful of internal star washers. Mm-hmm. The lock washers that they don't have any teeth on the outside. They're not the split washers. They're the ones that have the little grip teeth facing inward towards the bolt. Mm-hmm. And put those down because you can tighten those down. They will grab into both sides, but because they're smooth on the outside, they tend to seal.
Right.
And then once you've got those nice and tight, spray, paint, glorp, I don't care, schmooge with your fingers, some sort of a sealant. I like liquid electrical tape because it comes back off later if you need to.
Yeah.
And seal it so that it can at least stand a chance of repelling water.
Well, that's part of the game, is repelling the water so that you don't cause more corrosion. Another thing, too, it's like some of these little ringlet connectors are aluminum, and then you run into dissimilar metals because steel body panels, and sometimes that can just wreak havoc with galvanization, and you just name it. Yeah.
Best thing in the world is to buy the connectors. I'm still a big fan of the bare connectors with not that little plastic sleeve on them, and then having a piece of heat shrink. And you slide the heat shrink on, and the connectors, if you get the right ones, if you look at them, and they're easy to buy, they're copper covered with solder. Yeah. So they look silver, but they kind of got that grayish silver look, and they're usually called tinned. Why are they called tinned? Well, solder's partially tin and lead, but they're called tinned copper, and tinned copper will go to copper or tinned wire very, very well with minimal corrosion. And then you push the heat shrink on, because that actually, if you push it far enough that it kind of stretches out around the circle part a little bit before you heat shrink it, it'll actually cover over the raw end of the wire, which sticks to the inside of the circle.
So you don't get that green snot.
Because, by the way, folks, copper corrosion or iron corrosion, better known as rust, neither one of them are conductive. No. Any great deal. Yes, a little bit of through iron oxide is a resistor base. Yeah. But it's not a conductor base. No. And green snot is nothing. It does not conduct electricity at all, and it is expansive. For those who have ever pulled apart a copper connection that it was heavily corroded, you know that it blossoms and swells and forms this green ball of fluffy stuff that will actually push the two pieces of metal away from each other.
Yeah,
breaking
it acts like ice when it freezes. It expands.
So I know we've gone really deep into this, but I've had some people ask me about, well, you keep talking about testing. How do you test? And the answer is you want to test every place you can have a break. Mm-hmm. And then, on the grander scale, we talk about breaking a system in segments. If you go from battery ground to the ground of the item and you do not have continuity, or you have a high resistance, you go to the midpoint, wherever you have a connector, and you disconnect that connector and you check one side. And if it's just as bad, and then you check the other one and, oh, that's good. Well, guess what? You just cut your look in half.
Yeah.
And you can work down to where in most vehicles, particularly in the Jeeps, you might be looking at 5-6 feet max, and then you can go along and go, okay, I got to delume this and find where it's broken. And Scott and I have done that several times on several vehicles. It saves a lot of time when you know at least
where to look.
I'm in this harness and it's somewhere. Now, it's never in an easy spot. I'll just tell you that.
No.
It's always on the firewall behind the head and the exhaust system, or it's above the transmission down where the shifter cables are, or on top of the gas tank.
Yeah.
So just expect it, and if Murphy hands you a gimme, oh, there it is right there above the radiator. Take it, say thank you.
Yep, and then move on. Do not tempt fate. Next thing you know, it's going to be part of the wobble shaft gasket. You don't tempt fate. You move on. You count your blessings, and you say thank you.
Yes, it's like Shane's when we lifted up the fuse box. It's got to be somewhere under. Oh, right there.
Yeah.
That does not happen very often, folks.
Nope.
To actually lift up one part that took no tools to remove other than a screwdriver pulling some clips out.
Right.
And look down and see 2 pieces of bright copper. That's a gimme. You do look like a hero, though, when you go, yeah, right there.
Yeah. Well, there's your problem. No, and that's the thing. It just you just dive right in. You just handle it. You understand the path of the, again, like I said, the
I thought you were going to give me the old electrical joke, the path of least resistance.
I didn't think about that. You'll have to excuse me. I haven't really slept in 3 days, so I'm kind of sitting here going, I need more caffeine. But no, again, it's just, if you overthink it,
yeah,
it can be a daunting task.
I will typically, I've kind of beat this one to death, but I will take a given circuit that's dead. I tend to look at the wiring diagram and go, okay, how many wires? You look at the plug, pick, something on the car, your coil pack has 2 wires. All right, fine. There's a pink wire and then there's a color coded wire. All right. What's the wiring diagram tell me? Well, the pink wire is power. Let me back probe that pink wire, turn the ignition key on, hook up the voltometer, hook up the test light, whatever I got, crank it. Oh, look at that. It's flashing. The light's flashing, or the multimeter's swinging on and off. Guess what? We got power.
Right.
Good. Although in most cases it's not on and off. It's just there. So what did that just tell me? Well, I don't have to look anymore at that wire. Mm-hmm. So I go to the other one and I'm like, this is a little harder because let's say on a fuel injector or even a coil pack, that wire goes back to the PCM. All right. Well, all right. So let's back probe that and then let's go over. And according to the wiring diagram again, that's on connector A3 and it's pin 47. I will turn off the power.
Right.
Disconnect the battery, just so that I don't short anything out with a PCM, remove that connector, and it's usually marked, and I can go or look at the picture. Okay, it's on pin C27. And I go, oh, okay. Do I have continuity? No. All right.
Now
how many connectors do I got here to here? This is why that one's not working. Or it goes, yes, I got continuity. Guess what that tells me?
I have no idea.
Either the computer's acting up or the injector's bad or the coil pack's bad.
Coil pack's bad, yeah.
Because I have just validated the wire between both sources is good.
Right.
So then I go back in and I go, all right, do I look at the computer code? The computer say I'm getting a failure on the fuel injector? No, it's probably the PCM. If the PCM is telling me there is a misfire issue on that coil pack or that injector, it's probably because the computer obviously is monitoring that it's trying to send and not getting a response. So therefore, it's probably the coil or the fuel injector. It's and that just took care of 6 and 6 different systems. 6 fuel injectors, 6 coil packs.
Right.
And actually on most of the TJs, it's not 6 coil packs, it's 3 because they have wasted spark coils where one coil fires 2 cylinders at a time. So in the cylinder that's not on a power stroke, it just fires a spark plug for no good reason.
Hey, why not?
Why not? It's lighting it up so the exhaust fumes see their way out the door quickly.
Wow. See, it's not a job done till you get a head injury.
He just headbutted the monitor in here.
In my defense, I was laughing, trying to go inside the microphone when I did it,
But it's a step by step. This goes back to what we were talking about, that you have to understand how a system works to troubleshoot it. So you know that I'll just use my TJ since I know that one off by the top of my heart, is that the power wires are all common. So if you got power on one, I can tell you that at least power is getting to the cylinder head. If I don't have power somewhere, the brake's right there on that strip above the head. Mm-hmm. But if I got power on every one of them when the key is on, then I know that I've got a problem either with the injector or the line back to the ECU. Once I go, or PCM, sorry, they all use a different code. And then I do a continuity check. And that's a pretty straightforward thing. Again, remembering not to push too hard on that connector. If I've got a code, let's say I have continuity, in most cases I do. If I have continuity, do I have an error message telling me which cylinder it is? Most likely it's the injector, okay, or the connector. This goes back to the connector. Do I have a way to check the connector? Well, I can check the wire connector, but I can't check the injector connector or the coil connector. They're molded in. Pretty much those, what you're left with is looking up that injector or that coil pack and saying, is there a given resistance that I should measure across those terminals? And that's using your multimeter again, set to resistance, just touching the two terminals, seeing if it meets.
Right.
Now in an injector, it can meet the resistance, but still be stuck.
Right.
So you can go through this working process of powers, grounds, controls.
Correct.
And if you get there, you've gotten 90% through the problem solution. Mm-hmm. The key is when you check, go as far as you can to the device. I mean, ideally, I should be able to check inside the coil pack or inside the fuel injector, but I can't. The best I can do is get to the connector. But as Jamie found out, don't just trust the back side of the connector.
Yes.
Unplug it and check it from the front side. You may find that the connector itself is your problem.
And that's why we talk about checking the grounds. It's not just grabbing that the ground terminal. It's the plug.
Yeah, it's actually going from the plug as close to where that coil, that device, that light, that whatever is, back to the battery.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the circuit's not complete till it goes to the negative terminal of the battery. And it's funny, you find the weirdest places where stuff. I had one, I will share one last war story, and this was not on a Jeep. This was on an 82 Toyota pickup truck, back when they didn't have a name. It was just the Toyota pickup truck.
Yeah.
I guess overseas they were sold as the Hilux.
Yeah.
And I had done some work on mine. Yes, this was mine. I'd put plugs in.
Right.
And I had missed something when I put things back together. And I drove to work for 3 days and no problems. And then all of a sudden, one day I'm coming home. This is when we lived in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And I was cruising back, and she dies. She just cuts out. Right on I-66 in rush hour traffic.
Oh, of course. It never is.
And I start, signaling and drifting and trying to get to the right side or the left side, whichever one I could get to. And I finally crunch off in the gravel and I open the hood and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking and I don't see anything. And I walk back and I kind of, what do you do when you get under there and you're frustrated? You kind of wiggle things, right?
Right.
So I get back in and that's really weird. She's running. Well, I'm in traffic. Let me get home if it'll get home.
Yeah.
And I get home and it's okay. And I look under the hood. And I'm not seeing anything. And then turn around and drove to work the next day. Drove home the next day. The day after that, going to work.
Mm-hmm. Really?
But this time as I'm rolling over and I bounce kind of off of the edge of the gravel road, it fires back up again. And needless to say, I'm having some choice words.
I bet they were colorful.
Fortunately, that was a Friday. And it got me home Friday.
Right.
And Saturday morning, I'm in the driveway of our little house. It was a little house, single car garage. And of course, Mama's car's in the garage. The toy's sitting out on the driveway.
Was that the one on the prairie?
Huh?
Little House on the Prairie.
No.
Sorry.
Little house in North Virginia.
I was trying to make a joke.
I know you were. Anyhow, and I'm sitting there and I have the hood open and I'm just absolutely about ready to start taking the spark plug wrench and beating myself on the head with it. And my neighbor walks over who has precisely a half a milliliter of mechanical experience.
Okay.
You know, he does know how to pull a starter rope on a mower. I caught him taking a
Yeah,
drink
that
of
was
the
like
soda.
mid-drink. It's a good thing I didn't spit take it over the board.
And he looks at me and he reaches down and he comes going, and that's literally the noise it makes. He says, "Is this supposed to be loose on that screw?" And I walked over. No, I sprinted around that. What? And he says, "This." It was sitting on that little threaded bolt. And I looked at it, and it was the entire ignition ground lead.
Oh.
And it was on the stud that it was supposed to be, that was the heat shield mount. And it was supposed to be under a lock nut, which, by the way, I had found on the driveway the prior weekend.
So you had extra parts.
So I had extra parts. And I proceeded to go, "Yes, thank you, Tom. I really appreciate that." He said, "Did I do something good?" I said, "You did something very good."
I'm going to go cry in the corner.
Hell no, you just accept it and go grab the nut and screw it back down and tighten it down, and she never quit again. But hubris be thy name. So yes, you need to check it from source, which is the positive terminal, to the end, which is the negative terminal. And we always break it in the middle, and that's why we call it powers to the device.
Yep.
Ground from the device, not to the engine block, not to the firewall, to the negative battery terminal.
Correct.
And if you have A and you have B, then you look on the control side. Then you can start worrying about the device and all the other stuff like that. But I would tell you still 90% of the time, I either don't have power where I'm supposed to have power, or probably the more common one is I lost the ground somewhere. Somewhere along the line, the wire broke, the wire corroded, the connector was left undone, or it just melted.
Yeah. Sometimes the melting, yeah. Because that doesn't heat generated by a bad ground.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I'm trying to remember. It was BMW had a huge problem with that on some of the I-Series cars, that the ground wire, they used a common ground wire in the taillight systems. But the engineers hadn't really thought it through, and the fact that there were 4 separate bulbs in that taillight. And the ground wire was large enough to handle any 2 of them. Okay.
Ruh-roh.
And it really didn't cause a problem when the 2 of them were backup, turn signal, and reverse light. But if you had your 4-ways or some other thing on, it overloaded the circuit. And there were quite a few fires in the trunks of those smoldering fires where the ground wires slagged and suddenly the lightings quit. And so even manufacturers can make that mistake. But yes, ground wires corrode in nasty conditions. Not that I ever see nasty conditions. What? And then the resistance goes up. So that's why I tell you folks, Chrysler, every manual I've seen, I'm not saying they haven't changed it since, but ever since I've read them, they have said minimum or maximum resistance between any device and the negative terminal of the battery is 5 ohms.
Yep.
They prefer, and I will second that, 1 ohm or less. Now, there are older rigs, the YJ that we did the dash on, there were some spots that all I could get down to was about 2 ohms, no matter what I cleaned, what I did.
Right.
Okay. You know, that's still passing grade. It's just not an A+. It's kind of a C.
Oh, man, your grade card is rough. I'd give it a B+.
Well, whatever. So there, we've just beat the heck to death out of electrical wiring and grounds and how to stick a probe meter in, just like the guys from Omicron 3.
Well, that's the thing. Like when you talk about, again, we never really discussed we just, probe, test the wires, check the grounds. We never really went into a deeper dive about it.
Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah.
And that's the way I handle it. I'm sure some of you probably have some different processes and procedure. I'd be interested to hear them. You can always send us an email at
onthetrailpodcast@gmail.com.
And tell me I'm full of you-know-what, or agree with me, or tell me your horror stories. You learn more from horror stories than you do from attaboys.
Yeah, calm seas do not make a good captain. or do not.
This is true.
COMCs do not a good captain make.
Yes.
Channeling my inner Yoda there.
Confused you are.
It's better than any port in a storm. Anywho, oh my God, that could go along with the. Never mind.
Never mind. We're headed downhill fast, folks. Again,
Yes.
we hope you and your families have a wonderful holiday season, a safe one.
Yes.
We hope that Santa brings you lots of Jeep parts and maybe even a few that you want.
Oh, look, a fire extinguisher again.
Again, well, you know, the fact that you torched your YJ is probably a good indicator why he's sending you that.
Get one of those anti-fire systems like having a paint booth with a giant, like, you know, huge can the size of like a railroad car.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, I hope you don't mind me sharing this. You can always delete this at the end here. But, you know, we had a very moment this morning when Scott decided to change his Facebook picture.
Oh, yes.
This was just like I got up this morning and I always check to see if you guys have sent us messages and stuff like that. And it says, Scott has changed his Facebook. Oh, goody. Okay. I look down there and it's a picture and it's an older one that you'd had of your,
It's when we did the off-roading class.
Off-roading class. And the very first comment was from a friend of ours that said, "Oh, have you been wheeling lately?" And it was a gentleman that passed away 3 months ago.
Yeah.
I just about went, okay. I had to call Scott at work yesterday and go, "Did you see this? Did somebody hacked his account? What's going?" Well, it turns out that just for those of you who play on Facebook, if you use an existing picture that you had up before and stored and then just pull it back down, it pulls the old messages back.
Yes, all the old comments. So from 2 years ago.
Our past friend, a dear friend of ours that passed away, was commenting on Scott's change of pictures.
Well, it's
I didn't know that the cloud reached the cloud.
Well, it's kind of funny you talk about that. What was someone said they want to keep their Facebook account up so that we can post like after they pass away. There's something like that saying, you know, it's kind of hot down here. You know, can someone send some something to drink or something like that? I'm like, oh my God.
So yes, this was one of those not metaphorical, but metaphysical little flashbacks going. Oh. I was almost ready to call his wife and say, "Are you still on his account? Did you check your login?" No, it's just one of the quirks of our friends at Facebook.
Yeah, but with that
still, it was a fun memory.
Yeah, it was. While we do land this plane, also do again like we talked about last show. I had a couple of people reach out to me when we talked about, you know, spending a little extra time with family. You know, take time to make those memories this year.
Yes.
You know, and
please do. They're important.
Enjoy your time together. But with that, I think it's time that we've run out of time.
Yeah. Enough talking. Time to lock hubs, put the Jeep in 4-low, and hit the trail.
And thanks for spending time with us. And as always, wheel legal.
Tread lightly.
And plus, put nothing but pictures, memories, and your trash when you leave the trail.
Yep. And be sure to check in on the 1st, you know, New Year's 2022. Yes. We thought 2021 would replace 2020, you know, and now we're looking to 2022. And that's when our first podcast in 2022. So check in for that podcast of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott.
2022 show 132. Boom.
He woke up.
I finally did, I think. So, yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precaution, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.